Iran and the United States were not always enemies. That is the first thing to understand. Because if you only know the relationship through sanctions, anti-American chants, nuclear tension, and military threats in the Persian Gulf, it can feel like these two countries were always headed here. They were not. For years, Iran was one of Washington's most important partners in the Middle East. And that is what makes the story matter now. In July 2026, tension around the Strait of Hormuz surged again. The United States and Iran were once again fighting over security, shipping, and the risk of a wider regional war. So this is not just a Cold War history lesson. It is the story of how a strategic partnership broke so badly that it still can shake oil markets and global politics today. How did that happen? The short answer is this. Oil made Iran important. The 1953 coup poisoned trust. The Shah's rule made American backing feel personal and repressive. The 1979 revolution destroyed the alliance, and the rivalry never became normal afterward. That is the spine. But to feel why it happened, you have to go back to the beginning. Iran mattered to outside powers long before it became America's enemy. Part of that was geography. Iran sits between the Gulf, Central Asia, South Asia, and the Arab world. Part of it was oil, and part of it was timing. By the early Cold War, Washington did not just see Iran as another country with energy resources. It saw Iran as a strategic frontier. If the Soviet Union expanded south, if oil supplies were threatened, if the regional balance shifted, Iran mattered. That strategic logic helps explain why the United States became so invested in Iran before 1979. But it does not explain why so many Iranians later came to see American power as something dangerous and humiliating. For that, you have to look at oil politics inside Iran itself. In the early 1950s, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized Iranian oil. That move was not just about revenue, it was about sovereignty. Many Iranians believed foreign powers, especially Britain, had benefited from Iranian oil, while Iran itself remained constrained and disrespected. So nationalization carried a simple message. This country should control its own resources. From inside Iran, that could look like self-determination. From London, it looked like a strategic and economic threat. And from Washington, the picture shifted over time. At first, American views were more mixed. But eventually, the United States joined Britain in backing the operation that helped remove Mossadegh in 1953. This is one of the most important turns in the whole relationship. Not because it explains everything that came later by itself. It does not. But because it changed what American power meant in Iranian memory. The coup linked foreign influence to political humiliation. It suggested that if Iranian democracy threatened outside strategic interests, outside power could still decide the result. That memory never really went away. And after the coup, the next part of the story made it even sharper. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, did not simply rule Iran as a neutral monarch. Over time, he became closely associated with Western and especially American backing. His defenders point to modernization, and that part was real. Iran under the Shah saw state building, military expansion, development projects, urban growth, and an image of fast modernization. But that is not the whole picture. His rule also became associated with repression, inequality, political exclusion, and the secret police known as Savak. So this is the crucial bridge in the story. The 1953 coup made outside intervention look real. The Shah's later rule made that intervention feel continuous. For many Iranians, America was no longer just a powerful state with interests in the region. It was the outside protector of a ruler they increasingly rejected. That does not mean every Iranian saw the Shah the same way. It does not mean every opponent was religious. And it does not mean anti-Americanism was the only language of opposition. But by the late 1970s, anger at the monarchy and anger at American backing had become deeply entangled. That is why the next break was so decisive. The 1979 revolution. This matters because revolutions are often remembered too narrowly from the outside. People see the later Islamic Republic and assume the story was only about religion from the beginning. It was not that simple. The revolution was also about power, legitimacy, repression, class tension, foreign influence, and the collapse of trust in the Shah's order. It was mass politics. It was street politics. It was the monarchy losing the ability to hold the country together. And when the Shah fell, the alliance with the United States fell with him. That was the true rupture, not just because a new regime came to power, but because the political meaning of the relationship changed completely. Before, Washington had seen Iran as a pillar of regional order. Now the new revolutionary state defined itself partly through rejection of American power. This is where another common mistake creeps in. People often treat the hostage crisis as the origin of the conflict. That is not quite right. The relationship was already breaking apart. The revolution had already overthrown the monarchy. But the hostage crisis turned the rupture into something public, symbolic, and emotionally durable on both sides. When militants seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in November 1979, it became one of the defining images of the entire era. In the United States, Iran stopped being just another difficult foreign policy case. It became humiliation on television. It became defiance. It became a country that had taken American diplomats hostage and held them there for more than a year. Inside Iran, the crisis helped lock in a revolutionary identity built around resistance to the United States. So if the coup damaged trust and the Shah turned anger into something more personal, the hostage crisis made open hostility politically durable. That durability is why the relationship never really reset into ordinary statecraft. It changed form, but it did not normalize. Instead, the rivalry hardened through new layers: sanctions, regional confrontation, nuclear tension, mutual deterrence, competing security visions. And that part matters too, because the story did not freeze in 1979. Over time, Iran became both an ideological rival and a strategic problem in American policy. The Iran-Iraq War deepened the region's instability. Later disputes over Iran's nuclear program pushed the rivalry into sanctions, inspection fights, and recurring international crises. The 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, briefly showed that hard diplomacy was still possible. But when the United States left that agreement in 2018 and restored sanctions, the relationship moved back onto a harder track. That is why the modern conflict is not just one issue. It is layered. Each side now reads the other through old memories and new threats at the same time. Iranian leaders and much of Iranian political memory look back to intervention, regime pressure, sanctions, and encirclement. American leaders and much of American political memory look back to revolution, hostage-taking, anti-American militancy, nuclear risk, and regional coercion. So even when diplomacy appears, mistrust comes with it. And that brings us to why the rivalry still matters so much right now. The Strait of Hormuz. Hormuz is not the cause of the U.S.-Iran conflict. It is the amplifier. This is one of the world's most important energy choke points. A huge share of globally traded oil and gas passes through it. That means the rivalry never stays local for long. If Washington and Tehran clash there, shipping reacts. Oil prices react. Markets react. Other states in the region react. And in July 2026, that is exactly why the story feels current again. The two sides moved from a temporary agreement in June 2026 toward renewed conflict over security and shipping in Hormuz. And by July 14, 2026, the United States had reimposed a blockade on Iranian ports after renewed attacks around the strait. You do not need every detail of that crisis to understand the bigger point. The bigger point is that this rivalry still sits on top of a place where local hostility can produce global consequences very quickly. That is why the story matters beyond Iran and America themselves. And it also helps answer the central question: why did Iran and America become enemies? Not because they were always destined to be, not because one moment explains everything, and not because the past can be reduced to a slogan about the CIA alone. They became enemies because the relationship broke in stages. Oil and Cold War strategy made Iran too important for outside powers to ignore. The 1953 coup taught many Iranians that outside power would override sovereignty when core interests were at stake. The Shah's rule made American backing feel tied to repression and political humiliation. The 1979 revolution destroyed the alliance. The hostage crisis turned that rupture into lasting open hostility. And the decades that followed kept reinforcing the conflict through sanctions, nuclear disputes, regional confrontation, and deterrence. So the cleanest way to say it is this: the coup explains the distrust. The revolution explains the break. And Hormuz explains why the rivalry still matters to the whole world. That is the missing context. If you like my content, please like and follow for more.